All right, guys, we're going to get started. Thank you. Welcome to our second Downtown Community Task Force meeting. My name's Leslie Xavier, and I'll be facilitating the meeting tonight. And so with that, I will start with our agenda. We'll do introductions around the table really quick, and then we have an update on our RFQ, Request for Qualifications process for our urban design consultant for downtown. We're going to give a brief overview on the Urban Land Institute, what that is and how it may be able to help our downtown precise plan process. We're going to have some feedback takeaways from the task force on their recent tour of other downtowns in nearby cities. And then we're going to brainstorm on some future agenda topics for the task force. And then at the end, we'll have time for public comment on anything you've heard this evening. So with that, if we just want to do introductions around the room, we'll start with Deborah.
Deborah Von Hewen from the Cultural Commission.
Sola Cayetano from Santa Clara University.
Rena Brio, Planning Manager in Community Development.
Steve Lee, Assistant Planner. I missed the first meeting in December, so it's first time here, and happy to be joining the team.
Again, Leslie Xavier, Principal Planner on the project with the city.
Butch Coyne, Santa Clara University.
Anna Vargas Smith, Historic Landmarks Commission.
Adam Thompson, Old Quad Residents Association.
Rob Mayer, Architect, former Planning Commissioner.
Matthew Reed, I am the representative from the
And Dan Undersec, reclaiming our downtown.
Great, thank you all. All right, so the first thing on our agenda is an update on our request for qualifications. So this is a flow chart of the process. We released the request for qualifications back in February. It was out for a number of weeks with applications due from consultant teams at the end of March. When our applications were all received, the city staff, along with two of the task force members, reviewed all of the submissions and we scored them. We then did consultant interviews of all of those who applied, and we did those just at the end of June. And we are now currently in contract negotiations with the consultant team, getting the most amount of votes from the panel members. And it was a unanimous vote from all the panel members. Unfortunately, we can't tell you the name of that person yet as we're in contract negotiations, but there is someone we're in contract with, and as soon as we set that contract for a council hearing date and write a staff report, that is when it will be public knowledge on who the consultant is. So, and this gives you sort of a step-by-step of that selection process that I just mentioned. So if you want to read that at your leisure, it's a takeaway for you, but we are currently in the negotiation stage. Are there any questions on the consultant selection before I move on? Comments? Good. Okay, and this is just a reminder, this is our general scope of work for the Downtown Precise Plan. There's going to be community engagement experiences, a market demand analysis, and economic sustainability. It's really important to get the right mix of land uses that will work for the downtown. A land use plan, we're going to look at connectivity and circulation, so connectivity to the rest of the city, to the train station, to El Camino. The plan will also include design standards for new development. And then we'll also be doing an environmental review on the plan itself. And then finally, the consultant chosen will help us develop an RFP for city-owned properties in the plan area. So the Urban Land Institute. So the task force members, I've handed out to you a packet about the technical assistance program that the Urban Land Use Institute has. So Urban Land Use ULI reached out to us to let us know about this technical assistant panel that they have, and it's made up of members, their members, and they ask you to apply for the program, and you have to apply with very specific questions. So their goal is to help with a specific type of problem or policy question, and they identify solutions or implementation mechanisms for that question. And so one of the things that is available for us is to apply for this, but we would need to have some very specific questions for them to work on. Some of the benefits of ULI is that it's a cross-section of experts. So they have experts from, it would be ULI San Francisco, so from the Bay Area region, and they would look at it as an outside eye and not somebody that is within the community specifically. So it would be another view of developing in downtown, whatever our specific question may be. So just a little bit on the application process. You can apply to ULI at any time. They ask for a one-page description of your area and 3 to 4 very specific questions that you want them to address. And then also to provide a letter from the municipality in support of your application. It is quite a long time frame for this application process. So you do submit the application, ULI meets with you to go over the details of your application. They then make a decision on whether or not to accept your application. And once they do accept, it takes them about 3 to 4 months. They put together their panel, all their materials, and they put together a workshop style. It's a 1 to 2 day workshop or sometimes a longer workshop depending on the scope. So the work itself happens in a short amount of time, the workshop portion. It's a couple of days, but the lead up to it takes some time. And then following that, they deliver a written report with their recommendations at the end. So just thinking about the downtown precise plan process and what questions we may want to ask, it may be something that we think about as we go through the process. Right now, I don't know if we have a question. That's something I'm going to ask the panel members right now, the task force members right now, if you have anything you're thinking of so we can keep in mind. But it may be something that develops during the planning process itself, that specific question that everybody's struggling with. That maybe we want some outside help for. So with that, I'm going to open it up to the task force members with any thoughts or ideas on this process, applying at all, what questions you may already be thinking in your head.
Is this a neutral organization, for example, that they have no influence on anything that we're about to engage in, right?
Correct. Yeah, it is neutral. So they choose panel members specifically that are not in your community or working on any projects in your community. So they ensure that it is somebody from the outside so that they're not influenced. Oh, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I looked on their webpage at some of the case studies of projects that they've worked on, and looks like in Cleveland, they helped develop a project after the completion of a transit corridor, and also in Columbia, in the DC area, following the completion of the metro. So I'm wondering, we might ask them to provide their expertise in folding those into a kind of master plan.
And then Leslie, I had one.
Yeah.
So the ratio, because I checked the website out as well, we did, the ratio of developers, urban planners, how do you, it looks like it's a pretty developer-intense organization.
The ones that I looked at specifically, yeah, they had 1 to 2 developers. They had a planner type person. They had a policy type person. One of the panels had Christine Furstenberg, who just came and spoke to the Planning Commission on commercial retail. So yeah, they do have, I think it also depends on what your question is. They try to find the best people to answer those questions with those specific expertise.
Can I follow that on? So Christine, is she on board, or is she kind of subbed out, or?
For downtown precise plan or just?
If we took this on, would she be part of it?
I don't know if she was a member of ULI, so that's how she got on that specific panel that I looked at.
Right.
For the El Camino Real study session that we did, we hired her to come and look at that for us. So it is,
Good.
it could be a person that could participate in this as well.
Good. Thank you.
Anybody else? Matthew?
Yeah, I've had an opportunity to read the material. I've never sat through a workshop that they've done. My sense is that it's super valuable when you give them real clear direction. And so I think it's a great idea. You had asked sort of at what stage we might, I think figuring out where, I think we have some ideas right now what the challenges are, but we're about to hire a consultant to come in and respond to them, and it
Right.
might make sense to kind of let the dust settle and figure out where those needs still exist or where the hot points are. So I think it's a great idea. I would recommend that we wait a little bit and get a little clearer sense of where our gaps are. And I think they'll become clear relatively quickly in terms of communication with the consultant when they come in.
Great. Anyone else? No? Oops, wrong. All right.
I just want to say I like the idea, actually.
Okay,
So-
yeah.
So I'm pro.
Yeah, yeah. It's just something to keep in mind as we go through this process. This is something that could be available to us to apply for when we have those really specific questions that just keep coming up. Okay, so next on our agenda, we have the feedback on the recent tour that the Downtown Community Task Force members took of other cities. And I don't know, Dan, if you want to, who wants to kick that off? You can kick this off, so.
You got Mountain View up first.
I got Mountain View first.
Which is apropos.
Oh, good.
So just to back this up, we've been going 3 years now. Can you believe that? So in the beginning, we met the city manager of Mountain View, actually Adam and I did, for lunch back when he took it over when it was called Dogtown. So they literally had Dobermans patrolling the retail because there was no retail there. And he took it over. It was a huge street. I think it was 72 feet or something like that, Adam? And he brought in, if you'll notice on the left side, he was the guy. What he did is he went to Europe and was inspired by people-oriented development. And what his quote was to both of us was, never ask somebody what kind of downtown they want until they've seen a number of downtowns. And I think that's a mistake a lot of groups make. So I don't think we started there. I think we started in Sunnyvale, but to talk about Mountain View, it's gotten a little frayed by the edges. Bruce redid that in I think the late 80s, brought the streets out, and there was a good flow. There was outdoor dining. They did relocate the City Hall and Performing Arts, which our group is not advocating. We're just looking at that. But we've seen they did that for the reason of walkability and assisting the retailers. I think if we switch to the next, anything else on Mountain View, you guys? Oh yeah, you want to? I always forget. Oh, I did too. No.
One of the reasons we chose the cities that we did is because they have very successful downtowns, and there's many opportunities for that, and also because of the relationship that Dan has with rest in peace. But he was an incredible mentor to us. Some of the things that we liked about Sunnyvale, Campbell, Mountain View are probably easily duplicated in Santa Clara. Just simple architectural details, the way they dine outside on the sidewalks. So things that I just want to say there are reasons for why we chose these locations.
Oh, go ahead.
And I'll add that both Mountain View and Sunnyvale I thought were very successful in the way they dealt with parking, because parking was actually off the street behind the main street, and they had those archways that led in between the buildings, and I didn't see that in some of the other cities, but I know that it's something that Sunnyvale and Mountain View had in common.
Yeah. They hired a group called, which they're not active, they haven't participated in the Santa Clara plan, but Freeman Tung Sasaki, and their approach to parking was, in the beginning you have to have parking everywhere, in the 80s, the 90s. As that wanes, if it does wane, those buildings can be converted one day, and that's kind of their approach. I had one other point on Bruce. He was the first guy in the Bay Area that really came up with the community task force. So taking people from, different perspectives, bringing them together, having arguments, debates, what have you, and working out a compromised plan. He was also very, very big in hiring the best urban planner from the standpoint of somebody with experience. He really drove that into our head, I think, and then a precise plan. And from that, form-based code, which I know is, I don't want to go down that in the first meeting, but where you're really kind of dictating the tone of the downtown without mandating to the developer, you have to build it exactly like this. It's just certain criteria this far back from the street, so there's continuity of the town. And he was big on that. So he went from Mountain View to Redwood City as a city manager, Lodi, and then Paso Robles, and then Cathedral City. And then he retired, and he's one of the few Americans that could own a house in Paris. They let him do that before he passed. He passed away last year. So I think the next, you want to go to the next one? Oh, wow, we're jumping. Okay, so I rented this, I look like Kanye West behind this SUV. I mean, it was the biggest SUV. And I was scared to death driving up to Redwood City, but Redwood City was also a Freeman Tung Sasaki design. There's pluses and minuses to it, and I'm going to let everyone else talk because I've been talking too much. Obviously, they kept their theater. That is not City Hall. That was, I think, the county building that they turned into an art center, and they're restoring that right now. And then in the tiny corner in the back, great cropping, by the way, Leslie. Good job. But you'll see that what they had to do, everything got torn down, just like downtown. I mean, there were things left up, but the businesses on the outer edges of the city that influx lunch and make that a 16-hour downtown are being built back up. And I think that's Box is the name of Box. And there's another one, Evernote. So between them, they have several thousand workers that come down that, and I'm not real crazy about that street, but that mezzanine, and there's quite a bit of food there. Can you guys hear me okay? Anyone, any other thoughts on Redwood City? Nothing? Thank you, Rob.
So I used to work in Redwood City in the early 90s, and I didn't go on this trip, but I'll just add a little stuff to their train station. In the early 90s, they built a Safeway strip mall that backs right up to the train station, and I thought, back then, I wasn't even a licensed architect, and I thought, what are they doing here? They're building a party-sided wall right at a great gateway, and they're still trying to solve their train station gateway. It's highly problematic. If you've ever taken it, you kind of get off and you're like, well, where do I go now? So that sort of plays into the whole downtown and the connectivity with transit. But it's a pretty vibrant place right now compared to the 90s. So I think they're doing a good job.
And this is, go ahead, to parking, I was going to address.
Oh, yeah, they did have some parking garages there.
Well, they have it weighted, so it's, if there's a lot of goes over 85%, then the tolls go up.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Go ahead.
Versus free parking in Mountain View and
Right.
Sunnyvale. The other thing I remember is they had the great approach to sidewalk dining, where they actually bumped out into the street. What do you call those?
Yeah, they were actually wood planks that went out.
Like 15 by 15 foot.
Parklets.
Okay, yep. And that seemed to be very successful to creating the environment, if they didn't change the street, creating the environment of a European kind of al fresco dining. And the other thing is that we went into that bank that was converted into an office building that had preserved a lot of the architectural features and even some of the outside plaques that commemorated the year that the building was first dedicated and things like that. So you got a sense of the history of the place without it necessarily all being old.
Right, right. Okay. Anything else on?
Some of the things I liked in relation to what Deborah was saying was the art. There was a lot of public art as well as history, and it just kind of tightly woven together. And it was surprising. It's as you're walking along the sidewalk, all of a sudden you would glance to the right, and there would be this amazing plaque there, and you look at this building. Had it not been there, you would have walked right by it. And same thing with art. There would be a unusual shadow drawing on the street, which would draw attention to this particular boutique that was sitting there. Had it not been there, I wouldn't have noticed the boutique. So there were really clever ways of wayfinding throughout the downtown that wasn't obvious, but it was very subtle and it always caught your eye. So I think they did that very well. And it wasn't an expensive approach, but it was a very clever and original approach. So I think we can definitely borrow some of those ideas for our downtown and make it special like they did.
The one, oh, go.
I got one more thing.
Yeah.
It's relating
I got a
to
negative.
cafes and outdoor eating, and I think the thing that strikes me between Mountain View and Sunnyvale is that although they've solved the problem in a certain way, you still have the main pedestrian traffic dividing the outdoor seating from the restaurant. And so you have waiters bringing the food amidst pedestrian traffic, and to me, that's not like Europe. I mean, and I think Europe has got a really, they got broad streets and cafes that go 2-3 rows deep. So that's my one gripe. I'm not fully complaining because I think it's fantastic to have the outdoor dining, but I see that as a big problem in terms of design. Okay.
Go ahead.
I agree, there were impressive things. The negative that I saw was that it was a little more diffuse than some of the other downtowns. And I felt like there was a challenge to keep all of the kind of capillary streets vibrant. And so in that way, because it was a little more spread out, I felt like it was struggling a little more to create a sense of center and a sense of vibrancy. So we get the opportunity to think through all those things, and I think they had a little more kind of permanent streetscape and infrastructure that they had to work around, and so it's worth keeping that in mind.
Could it be because they don't have as much housing built downtown right now?
It's farther away.
Yeah, that's
so.
like,
I mean, and that Matt, you hit my point. So it's sprawled out. So the businesses are close.
Yeah.
So and walkable, but and I don't know if it's Prometheus or Hunter Storm, but they're building and they continue to build farther and farther away. Can they trolley people in? At night, do they walk in? What have you? But I did get the same sense, and that's why I'm very excited about our 8 blocks, because we're not going to have that sprawl. We got 8 blocks, and we're surrounded by beautiful, Victorian buildings, and you don't have that, what is that over there, or how do I get from here to here? And to, I think, Anna's point, in the center, it's perfect. Broadway, I believe, is the main drag, because everybody congregates on that street right by the Fox and down the street from there. But to your point, I think quarter mile away, it's sprawled.
Yeah, they're building more housing right now. I'm working up in Redwood City. I've been down there a couple times for lunch, and they have the sprawl. They run parallel with El Camino, which also kind of diverges some of that vibrancy down the El Camino versus down Broadway, as well as having the train tracks cutting through the downtown almost. Kind of creates a little bit of a hodgepodge to try to figure out how to what side of the tracks you're on and how to get from point A to point B. They've had their own challenges, which we don't have those exact challenges, but I think it shows kind of the importance of, returning a walkable, very easy to understand, grid system in order to, get from point A to point B or one end to the other. Because it is a little bit cumbersome to find your way around sometimes.
And see, I think in Santa Clara, and this is for another meeting, I think Santa Clara's case is the opposite. So you have housing, beautiful housing right next door, but those businesses that keep, because if you do have mixed use up top, everybody goes to work. So at lunchtime, it's dead. And that's what those businesses are for. If the closest businesses are on Coleman, they're growing quickly. How do you get that kind of, influx of folks into downtown without killing downtown with cars? So, anything else on Mountain View? What's the next one? Okay, I'm gonna be quiet. Mary, you having a heart attack on that one? I'm gonna be quiet. You guys like it?
I really like Palo Alto. I've always liked Palo Alto. I used to work there a long time ago. But there was always so walkable, and there was always so vibrant. Decade after decade, it seems like it's always been able to sustain that level of energy. Maybe it's it being a university town, having the students nearby, which is an advantage to us because we're also a university town. We have a huge population there. And that adds a different intergenerational demographic to the downtown. So it seems like a place for everyone when you walk into it, and it also has that energy where you feel like, I want to stay here. So that was one of my favorite downtowns.
And to your point, I think with sorry, it's the closest thing to Santa Clara with Santa Clara University. Although Santa Clara University is much closer because you don't have that underpass. But I took a shot of this as I think it was Ramona Street. I mean, you just look in, and this is quite European, where you look in just nooks and crannies, and you see, picture doesn't do justice, but it's a beautiful staircase up to, I think it's an office in there. The one on the right, I'm not that nuts about, although I like the window recess. I got the 4-inch, but yeah, it's a great downtown. But again, I don't think it ever got slaughtered, where Sunnyvale, half of it got wiped out, Mountain View, dogs, this thing was humming because of the university.
One more thing that I noticed that Palo Alto and Sunnyvale and Redwood City had in common is that they did preserve their movie theaters, even if they were repurposed. In some cases, they were, nightclubs. In some cases, they had a retail at the ground floor, and it just added to the atmosphere of being a historical site, even though possibly movies weren't shown in that structure anymore.
Yeah. Thank you. I would have kicked myself for not saying that. That's the whole reason I'm here.
I was struck by the fact that it felt like it was really more, and maybe this is the benefit of sort of historic evolution as opposed to planned evolution, but it really was better integrated. Housing, retail, and employment opportunities than some of the other spaces. It wasn't that the housing was a couple blocks away and quickly becoming further and further. It was that sometimes there was housing above the retail, sometimes it was one level back, sometimes there were offices that were integrated into second floors or even the ground floor. And so it was much more organic in that respects. And I think it stayed attractive even though it was really this mix of uses. And so for me, it was telling that you could have a whole variety of different uses of the space that were able not to detract from the others. It wasn't clear that the people that were half a block off the main strip were overwhelmed by the noise, and it wasn't clear that the offices were distraught that they had a beautiful restaurant next door. And so I think on that level, it was a really great example of a truly mixed-use space.
I wanted to add one thing that I've noticed over the years with Palo Alto, they had some key parking garages very early on in that downtown. And I just remember even in the 80s using those. And that's, I think, took a lot of pressure. I mean, it's still a very difficult place to go to. I think maybe I'm just getting older, but I think in my head, where am I going to park, and I'm going to deal with all these people, and why did my wife make a reservation at that restaurant, right? But, you know, the other thing is they don't have as much outdoor dining. I don't think, I mean, they were restricted because they didn't tear the whole thing down. So in one way, we have a benefit here that we can actually improve on that. I mean, they're incredibly vibrant restaurant district. It's more mixed, like you said, I think, than a lot of them. And there's so many varying size buildings, a lot of boutique hotels in there, a lot of old restaurants. The Creamery's been around a long time. It really, and then the funny building is the downtown, the City Hall, right? That's this crazy tall building that takes up quite a bit and is just this almost, I don't know,
It's
Soviet
like mountain,
era.
It's like mountain views.
Yeah.
Same architecture.
Oh, it's,
Yeah.
well, it's a different era, but, yeah, more brutalist, exactly. But anyway, and we are closer, and I think that's a huge thing, is we have such a benefit with the university right next door. The El Camino is a huge divider, although that university probably has a greater draw internationally, just as I mean, I have 2 au pairs that have come, and they've both gone to Stanford to get sweatshirts. Okay, so there's something about Stanford, and I think Santa Clara certainly has it. Maybe it's just that it's in my backyard.
Did your au pair go to Santa Clara University?
They didn't buy sweatshirts. We bought them for them. But anyway, that's enough for me.
I'll probably butcher it up, but I think there were a lot of fits and starts, a lot of developers that came in and said, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We can flip back now to the other one. This right here, to me and to our group, with the research that we've done in cities, and again, we've called around to the East Coast, when you don't have an urban planner, when you have a developer developing around Murphy Street, you get, this is what I call Minecraft architecture. So you SpongeBob SquareBox, there it is. And it is everywhere around Murphy Street. And it's just terrible. So Leslie, sorry, I'm directing. Oh, no, it's gone. The other shot, no, that's all right. So that's something that, I mean, me personally, and I think for speaking for our group, that's what we really want to try to avoid. We know there's going to be modern architecture, but the entire city is, other than Murphy Street, the other part of that area is just completely the same architecture.
Yeah, I mean, Rob and I walked this, we've had lunch down there a couple times, and one of the things that really strikes me is that they kind of did, they needed the housing component, so they took some plots and they built the housing component. And then they needed the commercial component, and they took a couple plots and they built the commercial component. But what they didn't do is have a holistic approach to kind of combine and figure out how to mix and mingle those aspects of what they needed into a vibrant space. So you have Murphy Street, which is great to go hang out and eat and drink and play, and then you have all this dead space. Either it's dead during the day or it's dead at night, and it's very cumbersome to get across, and it's just missing that vibrancy and that special, unique dynamic that actually makes up Murphy Street.
Well, I'm going to piggyback on that because true mixed use, if you go to most downtowns, San Francisco is a great example, it's something on the ground floor and there's something above. And like Adam said, what we're seeing more and more is, okay, we're just going to build housing here and then we'll do commercial here. Well, this is exactly what we did in suburban sprawl. We had offices out in the industrial area, we have residences here, and they're just, it's packaged differently, but it has the same effect, right? And so that's, I think, one of the greatest challenges, especially as Gateway Crossings just got approved, is doing true mixed use that is a destination for our downtown.
I agree. And the challenge there, so, and again, this is something that I'd like to talk about later on. Everybody rants about Los Gatos. Oh my God, we got to go to Los Gatos. It's the greatest, to eat. And so I live close to there, and there's 8 businesses that have gone out of business: Igati, Viva, J. Crew, Opa, and I'm forgetting a whole bunch. And it's because it's one-story retail, and that landlord has to make money. It's capitalism. Whereas if you have mixed use above it, that pressure is reduced. You're still going to have that issue, but...
Well, by building mixed use, that's actually true mixed use with the multiple compartments all in a vertical compression, it allows that dynamic to always feed that retail, that bottom. Because I think we all are kind of understanding now that retail is going through some drastic changes. The cost per square foot to rent these spaces is really expensive, to run the businesses and everything. And those are the ones I think the community wants, are the places to go and experience. But to actually make them vibrant is that you need those other components, the housing component, the commercial component. Otherwise, what you're left with is what Los Gatos is left with, which is a huge problem, not only in getting enough foot traffic to be patrons to those businesses, but also you're requiring people to drive, which is another big complaint, I think, and a very big concern within the old quad is how much traffic is whatever we're going to design and build going to bring into the neighborhood, especially, not just traffic, but also overflow parking. So by building true mixed use and meshing the components together will alleviate, I think, a lot of the need of people coming to the place for, through vehicles to people are already here.
Can I add one more thing about Sunnyvale? I feel that Murphy Street is so successful because it's so vibrant of a destination. The farmers market is there, the Art and Wine Festival is there, their Wednesday night concerts are there. Anytime they can, they use it as a place to invite people and enjoy the community. So that's one thing that another one of these Urban Land Institute projects had. They had reclaimed an area and they added restaurants, galleries, shops, had all the parades there, had all kinds of festivals there, had rotating art installations there, and just something to make people want to keep coming back and to think of if they were going to go out, that's where they wanted to go.
It was a successful trip. All right, thanks. Okay, so next on our agenda, we have future topics for the task force. So just as a reminder, these are sort of the key meetings that we had set up for the scope of work when we put out for requests for qualifications for a consultant. So these are sort of like the key milestones in the planning process where we're going to have task force meetings. But in between here, we have opportunities to have other meetings, sort of like we're doing this evening. And what we're looking for tonight, I don't know if you want me to go over these. So our next meeting will be we'll have a consultant introduction once we get our consultant under contract. And then once the consultant has done their initial amount of work, their existing conditions report, we'll meet again to talk about that, identify opportunities and constraints. And then the next milestone will be when they get the financial analysis done and have plan scenarios and guiding principles. And then finally, the plan framework itself, so the land use, the circulation, urban design topics. And then the final meeting will be reviewing the draft document. So in between all those meetings, we have opportunities for other meetings. And just a couple of things that we brainstormed about. I know a lot of community members and the task force itself has done a lot of research, like your tour that you went on, and what other ideas you may want to present to the task force on about successful downtowns is something we could think about. The Bike Coalition, I know, gives presentations about bicycling. That's something we could look at. Also, the VTA, their land use division, gives presentations on how VTA looks at land use. So that's an idea as well. But these are all just some ideas that we've thrown out there. We're looking for anything that the task force may be thinking they want more education on or information on outside of our key topic meetings. So with that, I'll open it to you guys.
You want me to?
So, to maximize the value of the urban planner, I think there's been so much involvement within the community, you know, the university and other, even the city over the last couple of years that I really think it would be beneficial to have kind of a list of the must-have, at least our internal must-haves before we actually go to them. And I mean, we're moving pretty fast through this agenda. And I don't know if we have time to make a list, but the must-haves that definitely we don't want and the nice-to-haves, right? So that when we actually sit down with them, we pretty much have like a laundry list, and then they can guide us with what is feasible, what's not feasible, and we can start working through them versus using their time to kind of hash out what we want versus what they recommend.
And it's probably going to be the first question they ask us, you know, and that way we're not burning UP time, you know, on this, that we have, we have a set of must-haves. These are flexible. This is something, you know, we don't want to see. So that might be a good use of this time now.
Yeah, we have plenty of time.
So the other question I want to bring up then is we've had multiple community meetings over the last 3 years. We've hashed out the must-haves, not-haves. We've done scale models. We've done everything. How are we working with that information that we've already collected over the last 3 years? Is that information that we've thrown out the window and said we're starting from scratch? Should we be reviewing that information and saying, let's see what has happened over this last 3 years, keep what's important to us and get rid of the rest? But I hate to spend months and months and months redoing something for another period of time that we've already done already. So where do we go from there?
The one, you know, one of the key things for our group, and I'm not talking about our core group, but, you know, the 45,000 or 4,500 that we've talked to, has been the return to the grid. And there sits Prometheus, and there sits the courthouse. When we first brought it up, we had a lot less information. Since that time, I think the old quad, I think Reclaiming Our Downtown, I think other groups have met with these folks. Some of this information, you know, we can talk about freely. I think some, you know, we probably shouldn't. You know, because it's in the works, but it's, you know, we're further, it's a good point, you know, they're the same challenges that we have. How do we get Main Street back? How do we get Franklin Street back? But I think we're, after these 3 years, a lot more intelligent about how other cities have done it, options that are before us that we can, you know, potentially implement as a task force or City Hall. And, you know, I want to say this one thing too, that, you know, and have this on the record, is that this City Hall has been wide open. You know, every time we've wanted a meeting, our group, Reclaiming Our Downtown, city management's seen us, council's seen us, they've been terrific. That said, a City Hall tore down our downtown. a city hall in the 1980s took liberties to take Prometheus and push it out to Franklin Street, eliminating that accessway. City Hall eliminated Main Street. A power like City Hall has to be the entity that helps us get to the goal that we need to get to. And we need a champion, you know, a clear-cut champion from City Hall with power to get this done, because these are not small tasks. Moving a courthouse, negotiating with a landowner who rightfully, and again, I'm not going anywhere near eminent domain, Prometheus has every right to be on that property. You know, they bought it, they built it. We just got to figure out a way to maybe entice them or create something better that would allow them to tear down, build back up. And I think we've seen, our group at least has seen examples of that, so.
To Butch's point, is the information from Urban Field, is that available? Do we, it's only a few pages, I believe, right?
Yeah, I have copies of it. I do believe it's still actually on the city's website as well. I can send you all links, 'cause it can be
Oh,
hard
I
to
mean,
find.
like, can we pull it up?
Oh, right now? Yeah, the Prometheus.
No, I think it's valuable. Rob, or Dan, you mentioned the street grid at being a priority. That came out of that discussion. That's where it started. So there might be other gems in this discussion that we have maybe forgotten.
Right.
Or that we should pull up and review again.
Absolutely.
I wanted to echo the same thing. I think this is a great idea that Butch had, or as kind of a history geek. I think there's value in things that maybe aren't as current, but still are relevant, and some of this data could be usable. We don't know, and if we have an opportunity to all look at it together and maybe do some analysis of the data and see what is still relevant, what's usable, we can be inspired by what we find. So I don't like what Butch is saying. We shouldn't just toss it and not use it. There is value in it.
And while we're getting ready to pull up that, that other slide, I'd add that there are often new factors or coming up all the time. For example, what's happening on the university campus and the Arts Paseo and the walk through Franklin, which will tie into the Gateway Crossing. I think it's important to look at how the story keeps evolving and look at it holistically, not just in the 8 blocks, but the, you know, overall as part of a neighborhood.
And then two, I think the point came up, our group, you know, we've had differences with the quad, but our group is dedicated to making sure that the traffic impact of this downtown does not affect that. And I keep saying it, the little kid who drops the, you know, the basketball in the street, that he doesn't have some clown going 50 miles an hour down Jackson. So, you know, through the use of bump outs and traffic abatement and so forth, that we protect that. On top of the utilization of modern techniques that, you know, we've got a clump of cities in this book that have used transit and trolleys without tracks, basically, that are flexible, that enable people to come into an area and leave an area without bringing in 4,700 cars. So.
Dan, you had mentioned the 4,500 from Reclaim Downtown. I think the other thing we need to be aware of is how do we meld the 8,000 people that are on the Santa Clara University campus into this? We need to figure out a way to make this a community, not a us and them or a red cups versus non-red cups.
Yeah.
So I think as we're putting this together, I think Adam, you had mentioned things about more corporate, more to make sure that we're supporting these businesses. We are the biggest business.
You are.
In the neighborhood right now. So I think part of that is making sure that we talk with students. We have Salih here to say, what are the future generations of students coming through, faculty, staff that are coming through. We're also building housing. We are taking care of our professors and our staff through that program. So they are going to be a core component of this downtown.
Absolutely.
So we need to make sure we're working together to
As
come
are
up with something that works well, connecting the downtown with connecting the university and not two separate pieces separated by Lafayette Street.
Agreed. One thing that we've done here, that, you know, one of your professors invited us in, and we got to talk to, Anna, what was it, Mary, 70 students during the class, presented what we, you know, what our group was, and it was awesome. I mean, we got ideas that we never would have had, and they weren't.
That's
you know,
because you're not 18 anymore.
I just acted. But, you know, it was more than beer dye on a ping pong table. It was, you know, they came up with very, very good retail, you know, options that didn't involve shooters and things like that. So, yeah, it was great. And we are reaching out to the campus to try to survey them and find out what they want. But I think to your point, you got gardeners, you have, you know, employees, you got waiters and waitresses, you have people that are supporting that huge entity, and we got to figure out a way to.
Well, the other thing too, as Deborah mentioned, we've started developing the Arts Paseo, which is the Franklin Street corridor. So it has the Mayer Theater, the Art and Art History Building, the Music Recital Hall, and we're continuing to develop that space. The biggest impact in downtown, if we develop this property, is the Arts Paseo. Last year, through those buildings, we put 78,000 people right across the street from a downtown. Talk about support for your restaurants, for your bookstores, for your coffee shops, for your other events. And that's, we average somewhere between 70 and 75,000 every single year going through those buildings. So it's another piece of the puzzle that we need to and want to as a university to address. One of the issues that we have, not only with students coming on campus, but also these visitors that are constantly coming into the arts facilities, is where do I go and what do I do? So it's important for the university to start answering that question and make sure that we're able to disseminate that information to multiple populations.
And again, I think, you know, for a future meeting, the other, and, you know, amenities that the university's looking for in the downtown, which I think jive with what the downtown could use, like a hotel or what have you. So, go ahead. Is that your floor, or can you cause this?
Do you want to look at the presentation right now? Okay. So let's see, probably want to get to, that's current general plan. Connection to Santa Clara Station. 29. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't have numbers on the slide, though. Okay, the principles: develop a flexible plan boundary, promote local flavor, unique vibe, respect the historical heritage and character, incorporated pedestrian-oriented spine along Franklin Street, address flexibility in uses, densities, and site relationships. It's all good stuff. Oh, there's a lot. Collaboration with the city, SCU, diversity of uses, arts in the arts community, enhance transit, ped, and bike access, promote balanced scale development. Okay, so they had 3 alternatives. Do you want to just look at each, I'll take a minute to look at each alternative? So alternative A focuses on infill. So Franklin Street is not aligned. No? And Main Street didn't carry through, okay. A meandering Main Street, alternative B. So Washington goes through, Franklin does go through.
I can't see very well, but is that street going through Franklin Mall there?
It looks like it is. There's some structured parking. The post office is still there. I don't see the courthouse though, so the courthouse must have moved.
So post office is purple, right?
Yeah, the post office is purple.
Barry's building is blue.
In 2017, this was a presentation done in 2017. So all the yellow seems to be residential uses, the blue office, some live work in the orange. Looks like along Franklin Street, they've got like liner sort of ground floor retail.
And you should have an alternate C, right?
Yeah, so should we go to C? So downtown grid, so this is restoring the complete grid. Post office still there in purple.
And I think this was the version that was generally accepted when we were talking about it. A couple of the items we said, and I think it was mentioned earlier, is making sure to activate the capillary streets. So putting the grid system is fine, just don't put everything along Franklin Street. Make sure Washington Street and Homestead, especially, and then possibly Lafayette and Monroe Street are very active components. So it's not a draw you into the middle of the downtown. It's everything is vibrant, alive. Looking a little bit towards Benton Street was the side that, with all the housing on that side, is to make sure that the residents on Benton Street weren't overwhelmed by the downtown. A couple of the questions that came up is Lafayette is still going to be the main drag coming past the downtown for cars. So how do you make it available and open so that people know that the downtown is there? The other piece of it, there'd been conversations on this, that if you have to go high, which we know developers need to do to make money, one of the streets that's easiest to go the highest building-wise would be on Lafayette, because the university would not really care how high those buildings were within reason facing the university. Whereas if you were looking on Benton Street, you want something a little bit more of a low profile to offset the heights of the houses that are there. Trying to think what else we had in that, Adam. Do you remember? Dan, what else we had when we were talking about this? The idea, again, of trying to make Franklin Street a direct thoroughfare, hopefully taking it all the way to the transit station. So it would go to El Camino, and then you'd cross El Camino to the train station.
One thing I really like there that it's been kind of tossed around is Lafayette is dangerous. We almost lost Mary there the other day crossing the street. People just buzz through those lights, even though they're flashing. I see you have a raised pedestrian walkway on Lafayette. I think that's a really good idea, almost like you can make that creative so that they're above traffic. Maybe do a mural on the outside so that you feel like you're entering a downtown. So there's opportunity on Lafayette. Also in Santana Row, oftentimes during the dinner hour, they'll just close off that street. Why don't we consider closing off Lafayette during the dinner hour?
State route.
I drive that, and I thought about that, or, traffic abatement, or, cobblestones, whatever, that diverts people away from Lafayette and into, unless they want to come downtown. There are traffic experts that I think, unless we, I think that's part of it.
Oh, turn your mic on, Dan.
Traffic experts are part of the,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah,
So,
the consultant team does have.
because the couple we've talked to, they had some pretty good ideas on both Lafayette and Monroe. especially around that rush hour timeframe to protect the quad from?
So one of the things I know that Lafayette was planned to be a two-laner all the way through, and it actually stops at Benton Street as right now. I'd like to see what kind of, city easements takebacks are from basically Benton to El Camino. Because I know there's been a lot of complaints, a lot of people have come and talked to me about it, that bisecting lane, basically the interchange between, morning and afternoon has been a real problem for a lot of residents, mostly because there's such a high, influx of traffic during those hours, and it confuses a lot of people, and there's a lot of accidents, and they're usually head-on or sides, not side swipes, but, somebody illegally making a left or whatever. So that, I think, would be something, I know it's not in the exact footprint, but I think it's something that we really need to figure out in the process, because it's going to impact greatly if we're going to start asking people to come down to the downtown. So yeah, I think we need to look at that between Lafayette, Benton, and El Camino.
Are you comfortable walking at night from Santa Clara, or what would make you comfortable? Business down by Monroe. University's to the on this side to the right. Holy smoke. I did that. Off, that's why. As you come down towards Monroe, how safe are you, do you feel? And what would make you feel safer?
I actually lived in the Prometheus apartments, and so I walk there all the time.
Traitor.
I don't anymore, but I used to. Someone actually got a gun pulled on them over there, so that was a little scary. And there was a SWAT team at one time too. So I would say generally 5 out of 10, but I did it every day, so it wasn't that much of a concern. And I also drove a lot because I came from work and school, and so I didn't like walking it very much, but I did. And I guess Franklin Square is a little sketchy, so there's just not very many good things on toward Monroe. No reason to go over there. There's a liquor store if you want to go there.
Yeah.
A couple pretty grimy bars if you want to go there. Tuesdays and Thursdays are lots of students are there, so it's a little better. But generally, there's really no reason to walk, and you just end up driving. So, plus that intersection is a little there's a lot of traffic, and there's just those blinking red lights, and a lot of people don't stop, so you wait forever. Yeah.
So you're employing the blue light around the campus, right? Is that something that if it were employed in downtown would make you feel safer?
The blue light.
The campus blue light emergency lights on campus.
I don't know what that
I got my
is.
But I think part of your question, Dan, is the assumption you're making is a similar situation to have right now.
Right.
The goal would be to make this a 24/7 or 18/7 type of downtown. If you have an Arts Paseo, as we continue to develop the Arts Paseo area, I mean, you now have things coming in like Taplands, you have the Hut back on board. So I think what you're seeing is a desolated area that's starting to come alive, and we have to continue to do that. And I think part of that discussion also becomes on the opposite side of Lafayette Street, behind the Jesuit residence. We've got the little strip mall that's right there. We've got the corner building on Franklin. Hopefully that'll eventually be developed also. So it becomes a place that once you hit that side of town, that's what's light and vibrant and alive. One of the downtowns you didn't look at, which I was very active and very involved with, is downtown San Jose. San Jose has a lot of different entities down there. It has the arts, it has restaurants, it has bars, it has things. one of the items that we absolutely missed the boat on, and part of that was because of the development issue, is there's too many holes as you walk through downtown. There's not connectivity. And I think working with this side from the university through the downtown to Monroe Street, it has to be connected. There can't be dead spaces like you see in downtown San Jose.
Right.
And I think once you get that, then a lot of the questions about safety and stuff is going to go to the wayside.
I think downtown Campbell would have been a good place to look at.
Yep.
Just because we go there, like that's the only thing that we do is go to downtown Campbell.
And it's live
So-
from beginning
Yeah,
to end.
well,
That's what.
That's the key is, I mean, you put people
Yeah.
there, it's going to feel safer generally.
Yeah, I think that the blue light, I think what you're referring to is like is it like the call line?
Yeah, it's the call lights for if you need an escort or if you run into trouble or if you have an emergency. It takes you into campus safety.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't say that makes me feel safer because someone's going to kidnap you. You're not going to run to the phone and like, help me. But like if there were more lights out, if there were more people, if there was a better like retail strip, if there wasn't so many dark corners or homeless people or liquor stores or grimy bars, I think it'd be okay.
Yeah.
So.
Another concern that I have, and I think I mentioned this at the first meeting, is access. And I know we've talked to a lot of students at our chats, and crossing Alameda is difficult as well. So if you're coming in on the train, that's like crossing a freeway. And most of the students say they end up just walking down Alameda and go down to the Alameda Business District because there's connectivity. There's a lot of lively little shops down there. So it almost feels safer going that direction towards San Jose than actually coming to our downtown. So that was sort of repeated over and over again in those conversations. So making Alameda safer to cross and then making Lafayette safer to cross and the connectivity that you're talking about, better lighting, more people. I mean, I will always gravitate to an area where there's a lot of people. I won't try to walk down a sidewalk where there's nobody there, As attractive as it may be, I'm going to think twice about it, So that's just points I wanted to make about some difficult access points that we have to our downtown right now.
From like a planning perspective, since we have some hurdles, I mean, we have a great opportunity that we have a large parcel of this is owned by the city and it's coming up for release, so we have an opportunity to develop that. But we have some obviously big constraints, right? I mean, we've kind of cut up the entire downtown, we've sold pieces off, pieces have been taken over by the state. We can come up with all these great plans, and Santa Clara has been really great at making them over the years, over the last 50 years, and none of them have been implemented. So, I mean, one of my big concerns, and I've asked this before, even with Urban Fields in 2017, is it best to come up with a plan and then try to work the plan, or is it best to try to get as many of the pieces fundamentally worked out and then work with the plan around the fundamental pieces you have versus the fundamental pieces you can't get? Because if we have this pie in the sky, and I mean, everybody would love it, but if we can't actually obtain it, then it just goes nowhere. Exactly. We put this thing on the shelf, and we all sit here and watch and wait for nothing to get built.
And if I can follow that on, so and this is not to put anybody on the spot, has the city looked at other cities that have had similar issues and, how they resolve them?
Similar issues, what do you mean, as in rebuilding a downtown or just in city-owned property?
Well, okay, so taking, step by step, so taking a parcel of property that you would like to alter back to the way it was, i.e., we can say the courthouse, we won't say Prometheus. So let's say Prometheus, the hell with it. So, all right, so we've seen examples where a precise plan, form-based code comes in, and let's say Prometheus right now has 160 apartments. In order for him to make it, break even, he's going to have to build obviously more units in the future, which could overflow and to, I think it was, Butch's point, down by Santa Clara, it might make sense. At that point, it won't, to have a 7-story building, sitting there glaring at you. Is there, do we break off and kind of investigate that and as a task force and do tiger teams? Do we?
I mean, I think the question that they're asking is one of the big questions that the consultant team is going to help us with is how do we do this? What is the right land use mix? What economically will work here? What would be viable? What may get people to want to sell their property or redevelop their property? I think what's different now than from what was a few years ago is that the city-owned property has leases that are coming up, and the city is, looking to put out an RFP for what to do with those properties, and that could really be the catalyst project that gets downtown going, which is not something that was really in play at the time before. So having a plan that's well thought out and realistic, I think will help that. And that's what we're looking for, that consultant team to help us get done.
And we did address that during the meetings that we had in the community meetings, because the one approach was, do we develop the whole piece and we wait to develop the whole piece? The other question came up is, do you develop the parcels that you have? Do you have the city develop their parcels and hope people come along? And I think the general consensus at the end of that was, this is a perfect opportunity to divide this into 3 parcels. Get a master plan that you want to look at and then take the time to build it. And the first parcel was the area along Lafayette, which includes university property and city property, coming down Homestead to, just going blank, right by the post office, that L-shaped property right there, which can be developed. And then continue to work on Prometheus property and work with the old quad to figure out a way to work it together. But at least if you come in with a grand strategy that says, look, it may take us 5 more years to get the Prometheus property, or it may take us a few more years to develop something with the old quad area, at least we have a master plan and we've started the construction. Because as we know, once you break ground, and that's almost half of the property, if you look at Lafayette halfway down Homestead, you're going to start getting people excited about it and deciding they want to be a part of this downtown. Or if you break it up into parcels, then it becomes a Safeway shopping center right here, it becomes an extra hotel there. It really doesn't work for you. So there was extensive discussion on how we should approach that, and again, it was broken into three components. So it was the L-shape Lafayette coming down Homestead, the property that bounds Monroe Street, and then the Prometheus bound, which is bounded in front by Benton Street, and take that approach when you're talking with the consultants.
What do you guys think of that?
Well, so my point is,
Sorry.
I think it should be discussed, but I'd hate to have us spend 6 months going through the same process with the same group of people to come up with the same results. I think some of those results we have to take as, unless something dramatically has changed, take that as a starting point rather than let's wipe the slate clean and start over and start the whole discussion over again. And I think the other piece of it is the elephants in the room are the city who owns the property. And as we said, I think those leases come up in 2021, 2022. We missed that opportunity. I'd put money on it in Vegas that this project dies for another 50 years. But the other thing is, so you have the city as the one elephant in the room. You have the university as the other elephant in the room because we own property there too. So I think if you start with that, have a community idea of what we want to do with the entire downtown, I think you can move this project forward.
Now, certain things, the thing that changed for me was Christine, I'm going to say her name wrong, Furstenberg.
Correct.
How fragile retail is. And what you're talking about with city property is basically 3 blocks with half a courthouse. Is that enough for somebody to come in and say, I'm going to invest 6 years of my life and hope that Prometheus's wall is going to go down, and we're going to get those other blocks, because a lot of what she was, and I don't want to misquote her here, but there's synergism there. And even with, we're leaving Franklin Mall alone, we can create a precise plan for them later, and if their kids want to do that, great. Let them be, that's fine, namaste. But 6 blocks even is pretty tight, let alone 3 blocks or 2.5 of retail. Would that bring in?
Well, Manuel talk since he got up.
Here he comes.
Since he got up.
The green light is on.
Well, sure. Oh, there we go.
there you go.
There we go. Yes.
There we go.
Sorry. Manuel Pineda, Assistant City Manager. I apologize for giving you my back here. I think, one of the key things that came up right now, and I do want to touch on this because this is very important for the City Manager's office. I think Adam started by asking the questions, kind of what are the wants, the needs, and what can the project really do out here? And I think that's a very good question, and we're stepping a little further away from that. Certainly, if we go back to the plan that Phil Paoli had worked with the community on, I think we heard feedback from both sides on that. So as a staff, I haven't come into this with the assumption that this is the plan that's going to get built or we want to build. I think there's certain elements that are part of that we probably want to emphasize and want to prioritize. So really what I would be interested in, and this might be a little homework for you and us to figure out how to get that information to us. Say, if you go back and look at the slides, and we'll provide you the link, and if you go to slide number 29 and 30 and 31, it has specific elements that they developed that they thought were important, is how would you prioritize those moving forward? What are your top 10 in order? And then we can do some math and figure out where the task force is at from a priority standpoint. I think the part that's missing from this, and I just wanted to jump in because we have communicated this, is that nothing, I haven't looked at this plan in great detail. I have for a lot of elements, but the part that's missing is the financial analysis. And I don't want to start talking about the phasing and kind of what building goes where and how Prometheus turns over without doing any financial analysis about the reality of what that means, because otherwise we're heading down the path again of maybe having a plan that can be built because whether it's a courthouse or Prometheus or the city properties, because the finances are not there as part of it. The other thing that we heard is that there's a lot of infrastructure, or if you want to call it streets, which the city has supported, grid streets. There's discussion of transit connections that would have to be funded. There's all the basic infrastructure, plus you have art and signage and everything else related to it. And we really have to figure out financially how that works. And where does that money come from these properties being redeveloped? So there's a lot of parts to it. There's our own city property, which I think we do think can serve as a catalyst, depending on what we try to do. There's the private property that has multiple elements, just existing buildings there, what's going to drive them to redevelop. And then there's also all the other wants and needs that we know the community wants and that the city wants. And how does that all fit together? And what does the financial analysis tell us that we can afford to do, and what we can do, and what we're willing to wait for? So I don't think we have enough information yet to talk about maybe to that level of detail. I think there might be a way, we might have to take this back and think about it, is when we look at those slides later on that talks about things we'd like to see or kind of what the vision is and their specific elements, is how, good plan, a lot of time, a lot of community input. How would we rank those as we move forward? And how do we prioritize that? Assuming, it'd be great if the financial analysis comes back and says, yes, this property can take on all that and still redevelop. And if it doesn't, it starts providing guidance to the consultant to have that frank conversation as to this is how it can be phased. This is what it would take, we think, would take for Prometheus to redevelop. This is what it would take to do underground parking and how it would cost and what the trade-off would be. This is what it would take if you wanted to do transit and restore the grid streets. What are the costs associated with that? So I think starting off, going back to the main question that Adam asked, which is, what are our priorities? And I think to get the consultant going in the right direction, it probably does make sense to figure out for the task force, for each individual task force member to figure out what their, either their 5 or top 10 priorities are for the downtown, and for us as staff to figure out
how do we get all that information so we can provide an initial feedback to the consultant where the task force priorities are at as they start doing their analysis. So I just wanted to jump in before we talk about race intersections or what the phasing will be, because I don't think we have enough information yet, and maybe the plan that was developed back then has the right phasing for it, but without a financial analysis and what that means from wait times and times to redevelop, it's hard for me to say that that was the right phasing or the wrong phasing or it's the best phasing. There's all pros and cons to that. So I just wanted to provide that context because I know that the city manager has provided a lot of feedback in making sure that anything we do is based on a sound financial analysis. So that way we go in and we know what the real expectations are as to when things might happen. That doesn't mean we might not wait for things, but we have to be eyes wide open that if we want to do certain things, the market or the finances might not work now, might work in 20 years. If we want things to go now, these are the kind of things that we might have to do.
So maybe it'd be a good idea to have a financial analysis kind of be in the early meetings of the downtown task force, like a preliminary, just to give us all a realization of what, dynamic is going to be needed to make it actually buildable, and then let us kind of run off with some of those ideas, the nice to haves, the must haves and everything, and then have them come back once we kind of start formulating like maybe a 50% DD, and then evaluate and say, yes, we're going in the right direction, or no, you guys are never going to get this thing built.
I think it's both, and I think if you look at the agenda, I think our second, we have a first meeting which we thought was important. One is because we wanted to get the process going, kind of like a meet and greet with the consultants, and I think that'll be a good opportunity if we have those priorities to present them to the consultants so they know what they want to be looking at. I think our first meeting with a lot of meat in it includes the financial analysis. So we're doing that right up front. So that's our intent.
And for the last group, when we went from the 2017 to finish that was our number one question the entire time, and we kept being told, don't worry about it, don't worry about it, don't worry about it.
I worry about it.
But we've been saying all along, and again, look at this committee. Do we have a developer? Do we have a finance person sitting around this table? And we've been advocating the university for years now to make sure that approach is taken, and I'm so glad to finally see it on the agenda that says, how can we do that? Because what's going to happen is, if we don't do that, and we said this in the previous meetings, the university is going to decide to develop the property they want to develop, city's going to develop the property the way they want to develop, and we're not going to end up with a downtown. So I applaud the city, and especially the new city manager and her team, to say, let's get the financial picture. Let's see what we're really looking at, because without that, you're right, we're just spinning our wheels.
Here's the beauty of the situation is that I mean, everybody can decide if they think a street grid is a good thing, okay? So this is useful, because we're talking about, did we waste all that time? No. I think that we have a street grid here, and the beauty is, at least from my perspective as an architect, is that you had mentioned that the height certainly can go on Lafayette, which is most of the city land we're talking about here. And what makes things more viable is the verticality, right? As we talk about retail suffering when the landlords have expensive property and they have to charge more, like in Los Gatos, you used the example. So I just see it as like a really perfect situation where the city owns the land. Now, getting into the broader picture, when you're talking about how do we make this happen, you got to think bigger. You got to think, well, do we have land we can trade with other developers to get them, or do we incentivize and all that? But it's up to, the beauty is that when we hire an urban planner, they're going to have a specialist, economic specialist. They can start here, and we can start talking about it. Yeah.
And
So we've got, and this goes back to what I said in the beginning of this, is we've got a lot of talented people here. Other cities that have had this kind of issue, let's say, turn your mic on. Just leave it on. Whatever issue it is, the court, it's not going to be an exact courthouse or Prometheus or what have you, but how have other cities addressed that? Has Santa Clara taken a look at that, or are we just waiting for the urban planner who may not know or have the experience of, on that? We do. We've been at it 2 years. We've talked to 30 different cities, and we can come in with recommendations on talk to this city manager, talk to this, are you guys open to that?
Wait, sorry. I didn't want you to get up because I know you're back there. Would it be beneficial to have the financial analysis actually look at this plan, since so much time went into this plan from the community and a lot of people came in, just to kind of do a quick oversight of what parcels the city owns, what parcels would be required to be purchased or traded or whatever, and say, this, you guys would need XYZ height and everything else, to give us kind of a baseline, because all the work's already been in here, so this could be our kind of like starting point, right? Of, you guys put this together, it would cost, hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever of the city funding to be able to reclaim all the street grids, to buy down the density, because none of these buildings are super tall, I believe, if I remember correctly. And kind of give us that baseline, or the reality of all these buildings would have to be 10 stories to make this all work.
Can I just interject here? I think it's really important that we do have an understanding of how much this is going to cost. So financial analysis is really important. Understanding the trade-offs that other communities needed to make is going to be important. But what a good urban planner is going to be able to do is help us understand not only the costs, but other sources of funds, because there are other sources of funds that don't come from the city. There are National Endowment for the Arts redevelopment grants for downtowns and community building. And so it's really, I don't think we want to look at the cost of it as something that's going to make or break the project, because there are sources of funds. But if we don't have a good grasp on what the cost is, then we don't know how much we need to cover those costs. So we've got kind of a chicken and egg thing here, but I do think it's important that we understand a baseline, not as you said, Adam, that everything needs to be 10 stories tall to make the equation work, but just at a bottom line, what would the bare minimum be, and then where can we look to for sources of those funds?
I think that's a good suggestion, Adam, to use an existing plan that's obviously been developed and, gotten to a good point as a baseline. And I think certainly that's something we can feed to the consultant, and that might help us refine, at least have a sense of what the infrastructure costs would be, and then obviously how development would have to be calibrated to really meet the expectations of the amenities that are expected in the area. Two, I just wanted to say, Dan, we would love to take the research that the community has put together on everything that has really been incorporated, and I think that feeding that early on to the consultant team would be really helpful. And so I would suggest that in a way that we could be coordinated and efficient about it, if we could utilize that meet and greet meeting, which is the next upcoming meeting once we have the consultant on board, in order to really showcase for them, hey, these are the things that we've learned on a variety of topics, and we'd love to talk to you, so that we could just do it in a tight way and present that to the consultant team, so that they have the information that you guys have tirelessly put together. I think that would be really great.
Okay, great.
Deborah, you had a great idea, and so I don't know if we can ask the financial analyst to see what opportunities are out there to get some funding. I mean, I think I know you said chicken and egg, but I think we definitely need to know what it's going to cost first, and then we can figure out where we can get funding from, and where we can buy down certain aspects of the project for what we definitely want versus nice to have. But I think that's a great idea, is to go after some of those, basically free money in different agencies and everything else. So I don't know if the financial analysts can do or contribute or add to that, or if we have someone else within the city that knows about grants and.
Sure. I think that economic analyses, fiscal analyses typically look at not just the cost, but what are the potential revenue sources. If it's property increases, whether it's, some of it can be grant funded, but a lot of it hopefully would be generated from the development itself. And those are sources that they can identify for us.
So Rena, if, just to follow that on, without, you can't give this, the urban planner away, who you guys are talking to, if they don't have experience with grants or with, like you're talking about with grants, we've been investigating that, and there's a ton, to Adam's point, out there, readily available money. Are they aware of that?
Well, we would love to get the information, and grants are usually annual cycles, and when we have a plan in place, and focus on the precise plan, I think that will allow us to develop implementation tools, going after grant money, all of that, all hands on deck on how are we going to finance the different steps. Is it about getting money for signage and gateway connect? There are different things that we can apply for. And, any consultant we would select has a lot of experience going after gigs, and gigs sometimes mean getting grant funds or whatnot. So I'm sure they'll be pretty skilled in helping us with that, but I think that this is like a year process in helping us to implement it, and that's grants and whatnot are things that we'll be looking at, not just this year, but, ongoing. But we would love the information that you guys have compiled about that.
You'll have it. Great, thank you.
So the piece that I think that came up that's missing from that process that I think would help at that first stage is the wants, the don't wants, and the nice to haves. Do I have that right? Because that provides a whole nother overlay for the consultant to use in trying to pick apart the costs. What are the costs of the want absolutes? What are the costs of the things that we absolutely want to avoid, because there are costs. And I'm wondering if there's a way if we can get as a group to a consensus on some of those points so that that introductory discussion sort of skips an evaluative step and allows them to move ahead.
If I can make a suggestion towards that might be helpful, and I know that's what I think what we're hearing is the task force generally feels comfortable putting this together for the consultant as a starting point, saying there's a lot of community input, we went through a couple of years, we see this as a good starting point, so we're not starting with a blank piece of paper. And certainly we want their expertise to tell us what they think about it and where they might make changes. But that's a good starting point. The second part, I think kind of you were bringing up as well, is how do we help you rank where the priorities are at? And I think that probably puts a little homework on us. As I looked at this presentation again, there's some very specific elements, and I think we can come up with a list of 10 or 15 things that are out of this plan that would be priorities, grid streets, a few other things. I always go back to grid streets because I worked on that a long time. And probably the easiest way to do it is to send those out to the task force and then have them rank those elements. And that usually helps us come up with kind of where the priorities might be at. And we can discuss if, that needs to be changed, but certainly I think usually there's a pretty clear direction as to kind of what people are ranking high, what people are ranking lower. It doesn't mean that your vote's a final. The task force can still discuss it, but it creates a framework that allows you to provide that guidance to the consultant. So I don't think we can do it just in a discussion here because you don't have the information and it's just going to take too much time. But if we put something together for you of what we see as the 10 or 15, and if we're missing something, let us know. Send it out to you, let you rank those as task force members, and then let us tabulate that. I think it helps us start getting a picture, not the final picture, but an initial picture as to where the priorities are at. So does that generally work for everybody as a next step in regards to that? That one is using this as a starting point because of the effort and input that went into that. Not that this is final. And then two, helping develop that list so you can rank them so we can start figuring out where the task force priorities are at. So when we have to make decisions and the consultant starts developing or modifying the plan, they can use that as initial guidance. Not final, just to provide guidance so we're not starting with a blank slate.
So I'm coming back to my original question. We did the summary report at one point, which outlined a lot of those questions that you're asking. So I think reviewing this first and pulling out the information. I mean, there were a lot of things in here, some I'm sure are dead, some that are moving forward. We were talking about Lafayette, and again, I don't want to get into specifics, but there was a thing about doing a flyover over walkway across Lafayette. Again, I don't know how that ranks in the priorities, but if you don't have a copy of this, there should be a record of it. So that's what my recommendation would be. Start here, look at the priorities that were set originally, and then we can reclassify them however we want to reclassify.
I agree. And I know this presentation itself also has a number of those priorities. I just think we need to take it offline a little bit so we can put it in a format that is easier for you to review. And in some cases, maybe a little more specific than just a grand idea. Work together that's something we're just going to do. We're all going to work together, but what specifically does that mean?
So I have a request. I'm new to this process. I wasn't part of this discussion when it happened. You could give me a list of 15 priorities. I might have a sense sort of what that meant when people had hours and weeks and months of discussion about it. But without the opportunity to hear and understand better the other positions, can be really difficult for me in the abstract to rank those in a meaningful way. So I don't know if there's staff capacity to convene us again as a group after that list has gone out and after we've had an opportunity to do that, just to talk about what the different elements mean. Ideally, too, as a new member and a part of the process, it would provide me with an opportunity to talk a little bit about what some of the priorities that I see and how they fit with that broader vision. But I think just prioritizing them it's going to be hard for me to feel confident that it's capturing the spirit of the group.
Can I ask, was the conclusion of that effort a prioritization with a number 1, number 2, number 3?
It's been a while since I've gone through it. I mean, there are key ideas that are in here, and I think if you take the key ideas and prioritize, and again, some of it is, pretty basic. There should be pedestrian connections. There's a piece in here, it says Old Town should be named the downtown is the heart of Santa Clara, should have arts-related uses. So it's a document that we should just put out and have everybody look through and go, hey, that's a good idea or that's not a good idea. It talks about local, small-scale retail is desired versus, big box types things. So those are priorities that we're going to want to put in. Some of them are valuable, some of them are not. But I think reviewing this is going to give you a pretty good idea of what happened over the last 2.5, 3 years.
What if we took those ideas, the key points, and we put them on like a Google Docs or like Quip or something, and then broadcasted that out to the task force so we can kind of get input, add, and not delete, but add a few more ideas, because I think we've all kind of learned some more since even 2007. Yep. And then the next time we reconvene, we can go through that list and actually prioritize them, amongst ourselves and have a conversation. That way it gives us about a week or two, you can start thinking about it and adding as you jump on, so.
Looks like it would be an evening to go through the packet.
Leslie, you have a copy of it, right? So we could distribute the summary to the entire committee and then ask city staff to summarize the top priorities or what they view as the top priorities. Would that work?
Yeah, and from my end, I'm trying to kind of make sure that we take advantage of all the hard work everybody put together and then also put it in a framework where you can have a very focused discussion that can actually feed to the consultant. So I think we can take that back about having an additional meeting. We'll do the first step, which is get you all the information, try to summarize the key points, and after that, see if we can have one additional meeting before we have the meet and greet with the consultant, or maybe we piggyback into the meet and greet as well with the consultant. We'll just see how the timing and the contract's working out.
And again, the caveat that goes on this whole summary is we ask for a financial analysis. So what you're going to read has no basis in financial backing. So it could all be pie in the sky for all we know.
Okay, so are there any other, topics that you all want to bring up? We're coming to the public comment period on our agenda, but I want to make sure the task force has had the opportunity to mention anything else that may be on their minds.
I did have one more question. We were digging around, and apparently there is a business district that does cover the 8 blocks. It doesn't seem to be very activated. Is there a reason for that? Can we help activate that? Because that could help us promote the concept of the downtown that we're trying to create. We've talked to a few of the merchants, Taplands, for example, the more active sites, Mia Vicino, Homestead Libations, and they all wish that there was a business district that was heavily promoting the downtown, the university, promoting their businesses. How do they interact? There's no way to interact. There's not even a website that says, this is Santa Clara downtown. You know, there's so many missing elements that could be the foundation for what we're about to do, a way of disseminate information about what we're about to do in a more community-friendly way than just going to the city website and trying to figure it out. Because there were a couple comments where I didn't find out where the meeting was. Where did you find that? And so just making the information readily available about the downtown, its merchants, the university, what we're excited about for the downtown. So I think it's a real opportunity if the business district that is existing now could step up or interact with us in some way.
You said you found some evidence?
Yes, his name's Ken Sinclair. He runs the Franklin Mall, very friendly fella, but he doesn't really, he has an email. He doesn't understand internet or social media or anything about that. So he's a great guy, but the wrong person for the business district. So if there is a way that we can help activate that space, I think we would be very successful with what we're about to do now and get a lot of momentum behind us. But Ken's not the right guy.
I have recently also learned about the limited business district, and I think their limited funding that they have as well, which I'm sure ties into the capacity that's available. We can do a little bit more research as staff just on what the district involves and then where they get their funding. And, you know, I mean, I think there's near term and long term. So near term, I think there's a need, which I think a lot of you have stepped up to the plate to coalesce interest around this particular plan, but to support further, you know, advertising of events and energy, momentum, vibrancy of the existing businesses, as well as then long-term, because if we have, you know, other financial tools in play, like a business improvement district or whatever, that can feed into more resources for the businesses, I think that might be the longer-term strategy. But let's do a little bit of, we're as staff, we'll do some more research on the existing district.
Okay, great.
Anyone else? All right, so we're going to move on quickly to next steps. So something that staff is going to do is establish a technical advisory committee. So that is made up of various city departments who will review the technical aspects of the work we're doing. Then we will be taking to council consideration of the consultant contract once it's done being negotiated. And then once the consultants under contract, they will start with developing an existing conditions report and start the community engagement. So that's sort of very high level of what the big next steps are. And then with that, it's our public comment period. If there's anyone from the public. Oh.
Hello, my name is Suds Jane. One of the things that I think Rob mentioned about Palo Alto is they have a bunch of boutique hotels there. And so people come there to basically vacation, and then they shop in all of those stores, and there's a bunch of high-end stores there. So if there's any way to get a hotel there, I don't know if that would support the university. I know we're doing a 220-room hotel at Gateway. So I guess I was wondering why Plan C doesn't include Wells Fargo. That's a lot of surface parking that's really wasted space. A lot of downtowns have banks right on their downtown. People can walk there. And then I was wondering if there was a possibility to rezone some of the single-family homes in the neighborhood to still remain single-family, but also allow maybe a live-work option. So that could be like Councilmember Mahan has her lawyer office where her home is. So maybe we could do something like that. And I was wondering if there was any consideration of how the Morse Mansion might fit into this plan, because the city now owns that, and I haven't seen a plan for that. And then I'm kind of surprised that I haven't seen any engagement of the current property owners like Swenson and Delosier in this plan. I mean, have they bought into this? How do we get their buy-in? What if they decide not to participate? Does it shoot the whole plan? And then I wanted to know what kinds of incentives can the city apply? Expedited permitting or lower permit fees or whatever to move this thing along. I see the land value is probably worth 50 million. You probably need about $300 million of development to make that all pencil out. So where's all that money going to come from? Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being so interested in changing my neighborhood. We live here, and we are going to be affected by the decisions you all make. It's not very happy for us. Who wants to live next to a 3 or 4 story garage? Anybody? I certainly don't, and my family doesn't either. So how about if we're going to have to make this place the center of our community, how about we do all underground parking like 550 Moreland or 3595 Granada, 2-story parking? I know it's expensive, but at least it's not an eyesore next to you. Okay, and what do we do about all the drunken kids that like live next door to us and throw whiskey bottles out all over the place? I mean, you know, it's a problem. It affects our living and our life. So, yeah, change is coming and it's unavoidable. Let's just try to make it as painless as possible. Right? Make sense? Here you go, sir.
Good evening, everyone. First, in the interest of full disclosure, I'll let you know that I no longer live in Santa Clara. I'm living in San Jose. I grew up in Santa Clara. I graduated from the old Santa Clara High School. I worked at the old theater downtown and frequented every pinball machine between the bowling alley and the Bronco Burger Pit. But that was a long time ago, and that's what I want to address with you this evening. I heard a couple mentions of accessibility. I need this now. I didn't need that when I was 16, 17, 18 years old and prowling those downtown streets. So one comment is in reference to the proposed pedestrian bridge, which is a great way to not get pedestrians run over by people that aren't paying attention to what they're doing. But if you've got stairways on all 4 corners or however that would work, people like me and people with walkers and people with wheelchairs are going to have a lot more difficult time getting across the street than if they were just worrying about dodging traffic. So I just want folks to think about that, because honestly, I didn't think about stuff like that until recent years. Now, I said I don't live in Santa Clara. I go there fairly frequently. I am a member of the Area Agency on Aging, which is known as SourceWise. I sit on their advisory council. We meet at the Santa Clara Senior Center a few blocks away from where the end of that grid is that you were showing up on the map. And that brings me to my other point in terms of accessibility. Again, I heard mention a couple times of some sort of people mover, trolley type of thing to move people up and down Franklin Street, probably going all the way to the train station. That would eliminate the need to move from one parking space to another parking space. If that's going to happen, whether it's on rails or a rubber-tired vehicle or whatever the means would be, I strongly suggest that consideration should be given to taking it that extra couple of blocks down to where the senior center is, because there's an awful lot of people that use that on any given day that would certainly probably have an interest in going to shops, going to restaurants, and whatever else is down there. And like myself, they're going to have difficult walking that first 2 blocks, let alone the whole length of Franklin Street. So, and the other thing is that at the opposite end where the train depot is. At some point, and hopefully not too far in the future, BART is going to be there. It's working its way there a lot slower than they were hoping for a few years ago. But there will be people using that to come from other parts of the county or from other counties. So some sort of a, what did I call it, a people mover, a shuttle bus, whatever, going from that train depot down into that downtown area would certainly be helpful. And thank you for your time. Oh, one last thing, I'm sorry. I keep hearing mention of building another theater. I would recommend you consider an electronic billboard. I can't climb that ladder and change them letters around anymore.
Thank you. Interesting how thoughts come up at the same time. I'm Frank Lemon. I'm a member of Reclaiming Our Downtown. My wife and I have lived in Santa Clara for 28 years in what I call the middle-aged area of Santa Clara. Our house was built in the 50s. We're grateful and proud to be Santa Clara residents and thoroughly excited about the opportunity to bring back the downtown after 50 years. What I want to say is kind of echoing on what the gentleman just said, which is I think we have an unparalleled opportunity to leverage that transit center that's coming in. We have all kinds of connectivity that's coming into that center, and I think that thing is actually a capstone that we often overlook because we don't see it yet. But when it's there, it's going to offer a lot of services to people who want to come into the area, and the downtown is right there. Recently, I had to take the VTA number 10 bus from San Jose Airport to El Camino down by the Mexican restaurant on Los Padres, and it went right by the university. That bus is free. You can ride it from San Jose International right down into the transit center. From there, you could walk into the downtown if you're able to do so. I could have done it. So all that connectivity is coming in, and I sure hope that we can leverage this opportunity to make the downtown connect with it, to make it usable, and benefit from the enhanced connectivity of that. So thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Mary Grizzle, and I'm with Reclaiming Our Downtown. I'm also with a part of the old quad, and today I'm speaking for me, myself, and I. And what I would like to ask, and I may be in trouble for asking this, but I would like to know, I'm very curious about the urban planner, and my concern is that, say if you receive 12 people that applied for the urban planning, and to me, the most important part of building this downtown, because it's got to be built from scratch, is the urban planner. And what if none of these people, after we look, after we see and know who it is, I'm going to be doing research on whoever it is very thoroughly. And I want to know if there's a process, say we don't like this person, say we don't think from what we've seen him do that we don't like what he did. Is there a process that the public or that the task force or that, well, basically the public, because I can rally a pretty big crowd. But what I would like to know is there a process that we can say, and what would be the next process? What would be the next process?
So once we negotiate the contract with the consultant, it does go to the city council. So that will be during a public hearing. So that would be the place where you could publicly voice your opinion about who the consultant is and your concerns or not concerns or support.
So it will be open to the public to.
Correct, yes. It'll be an agendized item on a council hearing.
Okay, thank you so much.
Could I follow that on? So is that the voting night? That public comment would be the night of the
That's
vote?
when correct, that's when the council decides whether or not to to award the contract to the consultant that we've selected.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
Could I just add one
Yeah,
more
go ahead,
thing?
Deborah.
Not this Friday, but next Friday, August 2nd at 6 p.m. is the annual Franklin Street Dance hosted by the Cultural Commission. So everyone who has an interest or love for Franklin Street, please join your community in celebrating the Franklin Street Dance.
Adam's playing.
Sweet.
Jazz.
Deborah, what time?
6 p.m.?
6 p.m.
Is there an end time?
8:30.
All right. Well, with that, thank you all for attending our second Downtown Community Task Force meeting.
Yeah, thank you guys. Great job. Oh, I was 4:38. You took it, where'd you go?
We were in Paris for a week.
Nice.
And then in northern Italy and Switzerland.
Oh, that's great.
But it can be exhausting. Paris is exhausting. Paris is exhausting.
If you're with your wife, that's a different story.
I
You know what, though?
love.
My kids were troopers. Yeah. They dug the street.
Hey, Sam. Good job, man. Thanks for coming.
Good. Good.